Jump Pluff Core. I'm curious to see if he's going to bring those 4 now.
Well, it is going to be the Torkoal lead alongside the Porygon 2, which is going to pair up against the Sneasler and the King Gambit. Now, this is the Assault Vest King Gambit, so it does have higher special defense than you might expect. However, that's not going to matter a whole lot without a Terastallization against an overheat Torkoal in the sun.
Yeah, and it's sort of the situation where Marco's trying to get 2 in parallel strategies going. You've got that pure firepower from the Torkoal whilst having the potential of setting up that Trick Room. So forcing Renzo to really have to choose here. Which one do you want to try to focus on trying to prevent or at least disrupt? And Marco probably having the Ursaluna in the back right now, really wanting to hone in on that Ursaluna mode, as it most likely is going to be very close to the speed benchmarking of this King Gambit.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely could be the Ursaluna, but what I love about this lead is it doesn't actually give that much away. Torkoal would come even if it was Jump Up and Charizard in the back. But it's going to be the Terastallization from King Gambit immediately to remove the weakness to that fire typing. Fires off a Kowtow Cleave into the Torkoal as Sneasler gets a Fake Out onto the Porygon 2. Here comes an Eruption. Still deals good damage to the Sneasler and honestly pretty decent damage to the King Gambit as well through an Assault Vest and with the Terastallization and having taken some damage from the Kowtow Cleave. Pretty good damage trade for Marco.
Yeah, definitely is. And Sneasler has a couple of options, either going for Coaching Boost on King Gambit to try to be able to reinforce his damage output, or even going for that Stone Cold Close Combat into the Porygon 2. Maybe try to accompany it with a focus from the King Gambit as well. You need to start actually getting rid of this, a very key component to Marco's strategy, as we actually have the Terra Fighting coming out.
It's time to start punching. Porygon 2 Terastallizing right away into the fighting type, removes the weakness to close combat, brings it down to a little under half health, but now will be able to resist any dark type attacks from King Gambit. Renzo doesn't fall for it, goes for the Iron Head, doesn't get all of the damage, may get a flinch. We are of course seeing that it will be the Trick Room coming out from Porygon 2, but first, Marco did not have to use the Eject Pack on an Intimidate, so just gets to use a U-turn, basically. That was an overheat, bringing in a Trick Room Sweeper. Ursaluna. Or Incineroar.
Incineroar is going to be proccing that Defiant, giving the +1 to King Gambit. But the question is, can this Porygon 2 actually set up the Trick Room? We saw Iron Head target it down. It can avoid the flinch. So all of a sudden, this is still a really good spot. An amazing one at that for Marco, because most likely the Incineroar is just able to just hone down, purely take advantage of the sun, go for those Flare Blitzes, and Porygon 2 can easily try to get some recovery going. So I don't necessarily see a through line for Renzo to be able to counteract the situation, unless you want to try to rely on that Rillaboom Fake Out pressure, understandably, but we're talking about the Sun Core. It is wide open to those fire types and no KO there.
Yeah, Porygon 2, thanks to the resistance of the fighting type, will survive the Sucker Punch coming out from King Gambit and respond immediately with an Ice Beam to pick up that last little bit of hit points on the King Gambit. Here is Incineroar. A Flare Blitz will also pick up the KO onto Sneasler. And Marco Silva has managed to do everything he wanted. Got Trick Room up, dealt big damage with that Torkoal, both with the Eruption to break Focus Sashes and the Overheat to switch it out and deal damage to the King Gambit. And now it's just Rillaboom and Baxcalibur on the field for Renzo. And this Rillaboom, it does have Fake Out pressure, but Marco has 3 fire types on the team and has already shown 2 of them.
Yeah, and even though Renzo is under Trick Room conditions that he definitely doesn't want to be in right now, because this allows Marco to apply all of his strategy and pressure, at least he's got a Fake Out user on the right-hand side. But Marco doesn't mind Porygon 2 going down right now, because that just means a free switch in for the Torkoal. So at this point, it's just about trying to keep the Pokemon on the other side, perhaps in, whilst also not quite healthy, I guess. But it's just a very bad situation that Renzo is going to really have to try to think about how he could try to tackle a potential Game 2 But for now, we've got to switch out. The Incineroar wants to be able to pivot itself out, and Ursaluna coming in will mean it's got its activation of the Guts, but very gutsy play when there's a Rillaboom on the side.
Yeah, it's going to take some damage on the switch, and Porygon 2's Ice Beam deals a lot of damage to the Rillaboom without the Assault Vest. But here comes a Scale Shot into the Ursaluna on the switch. And won't be enough to pick up the KO, but will deal a good amount of damage. Definitely put it in range of either an Ice Shard or a Grassy Glide. And this Rillaboom staying up on the field after taking that Ice Beam is kind of a big deal. Both Porygon 2 and Ursaluna are well within priority ranges.
Yeah, and that's sort of the great utility of being able to have those available to yourself, especially on like a Baxcalibur, which either can opt to go for a Swords Dance or the Ice Shard as the additional move there. But regardless, now I think Renzo may be tempted to try to either pick up a KO where he can right now and apply that pressure, and maybe try to predict a bit of a defensive play from the Ursaluna.
Yeah, the Ursaluna is going defensive, will protect itself, called out by Renzo, and no switches either, so that will just be a sacrifice of the Porygon 2 for Marco to get a new Pokemon in on the field. Most likely going to be the Incineroar. You would expect to get those Intimidates down onto both of these Pokemon, which will of course be sticky. They cannot switch out.
Yeah, and even though the Intimidate will be sort of dispatched over onto Renzo's side, it's a situation where Renzo really needs to be able to just get outside of Trick Room to be able to move a bit more freely, and Marco still has those resources. The Incineroar coming in means Torkoal still in the back, and that is very hard to be able to tackle down whilst you have reduced damage output, and it's so healthy.
Yeah, the important Pokemon here, I think, is going to be the Baxcalibur. The Rillaboom can't do much of anything into the Incineroar no matter what. May be able to threaten the Ursaluna, but with the fake out pressure that Incineroar is exerting, Renzo really needs to get something right here to have a chance of sweeping with the Baxcalibur once this Trick Room ends.
Yeah, and we're going to have to see if he could try to find that path towards the win condition. And Marco, we already know Marco, he doesn't really like leaving any sort of wiggle room for you to be able to get out of a scenario. But Baxcalibur does opt to go for the Protect, and that's sort of what we're talking about, right? Like the fake out going into the Rillaboom, and this is a complete good read from Marco, getting rid of the Rillaboom, and all of a sudden we got a 3 versus 1 deficit that this is going to be pretty much over for me, honestly.
Yeah, Baxcalibur, buddy, I don't know that you can make this work with only yourself and still with both the 2 threats on the field and the Torkoal in the back.
Yeah.
Fortunately, Trick Room has ended, so you will be the fastest thing on the field, but this is going to be so much damage coming out from the Incineroar and the Torkoal, assuming that the Ursaluna goes down right here to this Icicle Spear.
Yeah, and I think we could easily see that rotation coming out with a parting shot into the Baxcalibur, being able to bring it down to -2 and then have Fake Out available the subsequent turn, and that's just going to essentially spell game right now, unless there's some sort of like tragic misses that come into play. But no parting shot, just going for the knockoff. Marco saying, look, I don't want to play fancy right now. I just want to go for the damage and ensure myself that I can put it within range to just wrap up this game 1.
Yeah, with the Torkoal coming back out here, that means that the Flare Blitz should be able to pick up that KO very easily, as without the loaded dice, Baxcalibur's damage is so drastically reduced. Probably even more reduced than if it had taken the parting shot and the Intimidate. So there, incredible positioning from the Pokemon that you called out on Marco's side. The Porygon 2, the Torkoal, the Trick Room option with the Ursaluna and the Incineroar. Marco pivoted, danced around Renzo's Pokemon, and Renzo is now on the back foot, and Peru and Latin America are on their tournament life.
Yeah, and Renzo's going to have to really go back to the drawing board and consider maybe other options. I do feel that there's some merit to be able to try to bring Sneasler straight up, and obviously Assault Vest Kingambit does allow you a bit more breathing room. However, it's the fact that you need to be able to get that immediate pressure or at least disruption onto Marco's side. But that's not to take anything away from Marco, because of the fact that you lead with a Torkoal Porygon 2.
Yeah.
You have a very incredibly powerful U-turn-esque pivot move with that interaction of the overheat into the eject pack, which just essentially sets you up for success, really.
Absolutely. It was an incredible lead there to lead the Torkoal, just to make sure that you had all that pressure, leading one of those fire types, and you don't want to lead the Incineroar because of the Defiant on King Gambit, but leading the Torkoal forced the Terra immediately out of Renzo's King Gambit. There was no chance that Renzo's King Gambit would have done anything during this game if it had not terastallized. It would have fainted to the eruption that we saw. So really intense pressure being put onto that Pokemon by Marco. And smart lead.
Yeah, and really showing the benefit of having that Terra fighting on the Porygon 2 to be able to resist those dark-type Sucker Punch moves. Marco could have easily read into that, maybe gone for the recover, but he did identify the most important thing isn't for my Porygon 2 to be able to survive, because I can benefit off of a free slot. It's to get rid of that King Gambit, and he was able to just nail that straight out and force Renzo down to his final 2 remaining Pokemon.
Absolutely, and there was one turn that Renzo just got the call wrong, and Marco got the call correctly. Faking out the Rillaboom and double targeting it while Renzo was protecting the Excalibur. You know, those are the hardest decisions to make, because honestly, you could have gone the other way on that. It would have made total sense to me if you just left the Excalibur open to get facaded by the Ursaluna, and then you immediately lose.
Well, you go into sort of like the mind games of, is it too obvious? Is it so obvious that, you know, my opponent's not going to respect it? But alas, that was game 1. This is game 2. And we do have a +1 special attack via that download yet again on the Porygon 2. Same lead, run back from both sides.
Absolutely. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Here is the Sneasler and the King Gambit out on the field against the Torkoal and the Porygon 2. And again, we just saw how much damage Torkoal could do with, you know, even through taking the Kowtow Cleave into that Assault Vest King Gambit. Renzo has opted to go much more aggressive this time around, immediately going for the terastallization, similar to how we saw on round 1, but in fact, it will be the Stellar terastallization onto the Sneasler to boost the power of that close combat.
And I think you really need to be able to get that immediate pressure straight off the bat right now, but Marco seems like he may have just read into that. He wants to negate that weakness to the fighting type. So a bit of a change up here, and a bit of a risky play as well from Renzo, really going all in making sure that he could get rid of such a key piece here. Close combat, not even wanting to try to play around with the secondary effects of a Diaclaw, does actually do so much damage to hit KO, and I'm not sure King Gambit is well placed enough to be able to pick this up. Doesn't even target it, goes for the Torkoal.
Yeah, isn't even trying, just goes for the damage on the Torkoal. No eruption this time, will be the overheat into King Gambit. That is a one-hit KO, and Torkoal will be able to reposition now as the Porygon is able to set up Trick Room. The Stellar terastallization would have picked up the KO onto the Porygon 2, but that terastallization is just so safe.
Yeah, and it makes so much sense as well, because you're able to just guarantee the extension of this Porygon 2's longevity in the field. It's, like we've mentioned, such a crucial piece of Marco's strategy, and there it is. Trick Room's been set up. We've got Ursaluna on the field. Terra's already been used from Renzo's side. This is looking like a landslide effect that Renzo is going to have to try to crawl himself out of.
I would say a little bit more like an earthquake, but you know.
Very well.
Here comes the Excalibur. At least Renzo has the option of hitting these Pokemon with some strong priority attacks. Of course, we also just saw, as Renzo was selecting his Pokemon, it's going to be the Rillaboom as well. So very similar, the exact same Pokemon. Renzo just thought, I needed to get more damage, I needed to get better damage onto Marco's Pokemon.
Yeah, and this could easily be read by Marco because he's got all of the offensive pressure. He knows Renzo's forced to make some reactive plays. Ice Beam, there you go, that's what I'm talking about. Nearly picks up the KO, but this could easily be a headlong rush or a facade, and it does lock down that slot, forcing Renzo now down yet again to his final 2 Pokemon against these terrible Pokemon on the other side of the field that he's not a fan of, but he didn't even go on the defensive. He went for the offensive, and he's going to pick up the Ursaluna, though.
The Ursaluna is now off the field. It will be the Porygon 2. We know there's the Torkoal in the back. Most likely you would expect to see the Incineroar again, but now Renzo has picked off an important piece for Marco's offensive pressure and will be able to bring back in the Sneasler for more fake-out pressure. Of course, because of the Trick Room, Incineroar is now the fastest fake-out on the field.
Yeah, and this is looking very dire for Renzo's side. The fact that your Sneasler is now going to be susceptible to fake-out, and you don't have a Terra that you could get outside of the weakness to the Terra Blast fighting type from that Porygon 2 in order to preserve and save your Baxcalibur for another turn. So this may well just have to be a couple of protects from Baxcalibur, but no such thing so far.
Yeah, there's going to be the fake out into the Sneasler, and here comes the punching Porygon 2. Terra Blast all out pummeling onto Baxcalibur. One hit KO, Baxcalibur goes down.
Yeah, and what way to go about it. Marco absolutely piloting this team, especially that Porygon 2, understanding why it's so integral to the general composition. He's able to go ahead and lock himself into the finals of the 2025 LAIC. He is on a riot.
The defending